What is it that haunts us? What are those sounds? Is there a veil in between us and them? Those who do not pass on completely. Those who are trapped. Sometimes I feel as if you could just reach through and touch them. You see, as a young soldier in Northern Ireland, we had a guy step on a mine and there was nothing left of him. And we couldn't deal with it. We said there must be something. No. And we wondered, wow. Then I read a book. This book, Royal Welsh Fusiliers, a guy from South Wales there, Big Dick, because he was 6'4" and called Richard. You won't understand, young man. Good. And he was in a dugout after a big fight. And he says, how will God deal with this? How will God deal with all of these souls at once? Surely he hasn't got enough angels to deal with it. And it reminded me of the guy, Scots Guards, who'd been blown to smithereens. And I thought, will his soul know where to go? But change the word soul. Take away the religious. Make it an energy force, an impulse, your life spark. What happens to it? I know Ricky Gervais reckons we just turn off. How? How come that some of them are still around? So what we're going to do for you this evening is we're going to bore the pants off you with ghost stories. Chepstow Castle, where I worked for years down in South Wales, weird people in South Wales. My wife's from South Wales, aren't you? There was a bunch of scientists set up in Martin's Tower. Henry Martin was what's called a regicide. He signed the death warrant to Charles I and they cut his head off. Charles I was about this tall, had a big nose and was Scottish. No wonder they cut his head off. And Henry Martin was captured by Charles II's vindictiveness and imprisoned in Martin's Tower. And he stood for 20 years every morning in the same spot. And when he died, the next day, he was still there. And the next day. And I was told, yeah, Henry Martin, you'll see him standing there. And I went, oh, that's really interesting. They says, go on, lock it up. I said, I don't care. I'll lock the tower up over night time. I don't care, okay? So, and there was a shadow. I don't care. Till the scientists came and set up all their gear. And dressed like Robin Hood with my longbow, I went up there. I said, what are you doing? Oh, we're checking for this, this and this. I said, are you ghost hunters? Oh no, we're scientists. So you're ghost hunters then? But we're scientists. And we're trying to see if we can get any readings of something in the walls. They says, we understand that Henry Martin was here. I said, yeah, but he didn't die here. He died in the bedroom over yonder. Ah, right, okay. And I says, but you've got it all wrong. This was a corridor way back in history, connected to the battlements there and then the way out there. And in 1646, in the January, when the Parliamentarian forces came here, they blew a hole in that wall. And every man that was in this corridor and down in the battlements, not the battlements, down in the stairway, were killed by force of arms, swords, daggers. I said, it's very violent. I said, if you look around, you can see the bullet holes. And they're suddenly going, oh my goodness, yes. I said, there are also slash marks from swords and things like that. I said, a lot of men died here. They're buried out the front. There's a tree on the grave. All of a sudden, that explains. He said, was there any cannons? I said, there was one literally the other side of that door. They said, we're getting so many readings from the stonework. Now we can understand. You see, we believe scientifically, no spookiness, that there is a residue of energy left after a battle. And we can often pick it up. And I went, oh, that's really interesting. I went for a cup of tea. When I came back, they'd all packed up except one scientist. And he says, you're not impressed, are you? I said, what's that in? You know, ghosts and all that. I said, I ain't scared of ghosts. I said, I was a soldier, mate. I says, I know what's really dangerous, and it's got 2 legs and walks upright. Yeah, and he went, oh, right. I said, anyway, what are you? He says, well, I'm a DNA expert. Oh yeah. What are you doing with these then? He says, well, we've got a theory, which they've since proven. How long you shot the longbow? I said, since I was about 5 or 6. Who taught you? Well, nobody. Why did you want to be a bowman? Well, I always wanted to be a bowman. Have you ever thought it may be in your DNA? And I looked at him and I thought, twit. But I went home, did some research. The Battle of Agincourt, 25th of October, 1415. I've known the story, I think, before I was born. And there was a William Hicks, who was one of the bowmen there, who survived. My name's Kevin. My mum changed it from William on the day of the christening. William Hicks comes from the same part of Gloucester that my family came from in the olden days. Could it be the part of him is in me? The ghost of his past is not dead. He's standing in front of you. Could it be we are all part ghost? Isn't that great? The look on your faces! It's brilliant! So what we're going to do now... is when you get a little bit of mist as somebody pees themselves. So, do you like the lights? We had it all set up and then they went out the last time. And 3 blokes, men, tried to repair it all. And then little Linnea, who's just gone home, bless her, she came in and switched them on. If you go to England, funny place, to the city of York, right outside the cathedral there's an old medieval mansion house. Belongs to the church, of course, where the bishops used to live. And it's now various things. And it was being renovated some years ago. And a chap had to go downstairs to sort out some of the original plumbing, the lead pipes and that kind of thing. And he eventually went down into the basement and realised he'd got to go into the sub-basement, which took him down into the medieval world. And there he was in this low, cavernous thing. And it was amazing. He just couldn't believe where he was, and he's looking for the pipes, when all of a sudden there was a great trumpet blast. Give him a round of applause. Because last time he missed it. He turned around as the clippity-clop of horses' hooves. And you can imagine this, you're in the sub-basement, blah, blah, and then in front of his eyes, a squadron of cavalry, Roman cavalry, simply clip-clopped past him, out of one wall, down, and through another. He said they were asleep, the men. They were exhausted, lying over their horses. He was so shook up that he took a big step back, just in time for the Roman legionaries to march past, complete with their shields, their spears, yeah? And then he ran away, terrified. The foreman laughed. But the guy who owned the place says, you've seen them, haven't you? Just the horses and the men asleep, and then the legionaries marching. Well, if you go up onto Hadrian's Wall, the great wall between us and the Scots, that's not true actually, because it's 30, 40 miles south of Scotland. You can actually see apparently certain times the Roman legionaries marching along. Are they just replaying something? Like Waterloo, the battlefield, occasionally soldiers are seen marching. In France, soldiers marching along. Is it just something in time that actually just replays? But there's that other thing, isn't there? The apparition. On the Somme, in the middle of the first Somme battle, not the first day, the Somme battle lasted nearly 6 months. One part of no man's land had been contested so much that the troops were becoming reluctant to even crawl into it. And there was a story coming out that in some of the tunnels in there and in some of the trenches that are in no man's land, there were ghouls, ghosts. And this kind of story still exists in certain quarters of the world. Hollywood is one of them. They made a film about it. The fact is, they were living soldiers. And what had happened is they'd been caught right in the middle of no man's land on an extensive patrol going forward, a couple of hundred men. And they'd been caught with a serious gas attack. And what the wailing and screaming actually was the men dying. They said you could see the monsters' faces. If you could see them, well, their faces were falling apart from the chlorine gas. And they described some of them, but they were wearing the new respirators. They would look like monsters. You have no idea, unless you've been caught in an explosion, what it's really like. I could never understand when I was caught. Why can't I remember it as one thing? And the psychologists, when I was being looked at, said, well, your brain cannot absorb it. It is too much. So you imagine those guys up on the Russian front, on the Western front, with all those shells exploding continuously. The terror and the way that time, space, maybe separates just a little bit. And that's the thing, isn't it? Who are we to doubt? So Michael James went to England, and he did a history tour, and he went to the most incredible museum at Bovingdon Camp down in Dorset in the south of England. It was our biggest tank training grounds. They got the biggest tank museum you've ever seen. And my father was there helping to build it. He was Queen's Fourth Own Hussars. They were stationed there. They'll do as they're bloody told, and they will build it. And there, under tarpaulin, was these tanks that had been brought back from North Africa and from Holland and goodness knows what. And one of them was a Tiger. And this Tiger, they couldn't get it going. There was all these kind of problems with it. So they opened up to give it a good inspection, and tucked in behind the engine was the remains of an SS soldier. So they remove it, send it up to Cannock Chase, buried with all his buddies, and they rolled it into place. In fact, they've since, I believe, got it going. The only problem is that little German, you can see him most days. He's looking at the other tanks, the German tanks, as if he's inspecting them. They've given him the nickname Herman the German. But Herman the German is dressed in black Panther coveralls, has SS runes. When you see him, you can tell. Is he just repeating what he was? Or is he trapped? Was it somebody once said, if they don't have a grave, they don't rest? So this is how I was dressed when I went over to the Somme for one of the anniversaries to help the British Legion. But before I go into that, a young soldier stationed in Berlin. Our barracks were the Geheimstadtpolizei headquarters for the Olympia Stadium, the Gestapo. One of our rooms had the execution stuff still in it. The whole building was just a shell after the battle for Berlin. A lot of men had been killed. Just down from our barracks, 200 Hitler Youth had held off and killed over 2,000 German soldiers. Trig V, is your thing doing something? Oh, just carry on. Okay, I'll just carry on. So we were fully aware, you know, there were bullet holes everywhere, strike marks, you could see where things had been rebuilt. And everybody just accepted it. We lived in a battlefield. And I was on the top floor. I got a very early patrol down into the DDR, into the Soviet zone the next morning. So we were pretty sober, ready, fast asleep, middle of the night. I shared the room with another guy on the same patrol, when all of a sudden there was an explosion. The windows burst in. 2 or 3 soldiers, I can still see the bloody things, bounced off the end of my bed, ran through the door, and there was a right commotion in the corridor. I'm sat bolt upright looking at the soldier, my buddy, on the other side, and we're terrified. And I says to him, did you just, and he says, did you just see them? And I said, yeah. I said, you're joking? He says, yeah. So we ran out into the corridor, nothing there, nothing. So we ran to the stairwell, and a piece of brass had been blown up through the floor and tore my sole on my right foot from the toe to the heel. Boy, did it bleed. I went, ouch, that's sore. So I'm waiting for a lift to the hospital, and I'm downstairs and I'm shaking. And my buddy's coming with me, he's shaking too. And the staff sergeant on duty says, are you two all right? Apart from your foot. And he says, you've seen them, haven't you? Did they burst into your room? Did they run down the corridor fighting? And he says, well, yeah. He says, everybody sees it. But the saddest is Charlie and the young girls who had to have the bedroom where the executions took place. They were just freshly posted in. They were put in there for a couple of nights until their accommodation could be found for their permanent residence, as it were. In the ceiling was the remains of a hook, an iron hook, that the British had removed most of it. It was the hangman's noose. It was the hangman's hook. And these young girls would be woken up, shook on the shoulder by young Charles. Some of us spoke German in those days. One of the young girls, terrified out of her wits, she says, who are you? I'm Charles. What do you want? And she realizes then that he's dressed in German uniform, Wehrmacht uniform. He says, oh, they killed me here. And then he gets up and walks away. So being the military police, we did an investigation. Charles was 17 years of age when he was hanged by the SS. His crime, he'd wandered away from his unit. So they killed him for it. It didn't matter where you went in old Berlin. Each lamppost would have had a corpse hanging from it. Don't go into the Tiergarten, because that's where the centre of the fighting was. Just in one pit, there are 2,000 Russians buried there. So, my experiences as a British soldier, sometimes quite something. But then, when I was doing this for the British Legion, could you go over to France and teach the youngsters what it was like on the Somme? And I said yes, but I didn't like it. I felt like an intruder on the battlefield, you know. So on the first day, I bunked out as soon as I could. Me and Gary, my best man, we served together in Ireland. We decided that we'd go for a walk in the dark on the battlefield. And we got to a place called the Sunken Road near Beaumont Hamel. And there the Lancashire Fusiliers were getting ready, dressed exactly as I am now with the extra kit, of course. The Germans knew we were coming. They also knew where the Lancashire Fusiliers were to a man. A heavy machine gun can shoot 3 miles. If it's on a fixed firing line, it's accurate. As they blew the whistles, every one of them was killed. It's famous, the Sunken Road. The families have put little memorials in the bushes and that, you know. And most of the guys are buried just in no man's land. So me and Gary sat there, me puffing on my pipe. We brewed a cup of tea because we're British. And it's dark. And Gary said something to me, and I turned to him and I said, what, mate? But Gary was here, not there. And the voice spoke again. An English voice. An accent. Lancashire. And then I saw Gary looking round. I says, you all right, mate? He says, can you hear them? I said, they're talking to you. No, I can just hear the voices. They're talking to each other. And then we felt as if we were intruders, you know. So I says, come on, let's go. Go down the pub, which is important for British people. So we went to the local French bar for the French people. And the gaffer was there and he spoke English. And where you been? Oh, we've been down the sunken road. Pourquoi? French. He says, did you hear them? I said, what do you mean? Did you hear the soldiers, the fusiliers? And Gary and I both nodded together. And the Frenchman said, yes. They're still here. How did you feel? I said, I felt like an intruder. He said, we don't go there in the dock. Are they ghosts? Is it real? You've heard a few stories. How about the one of the 3 Royal Welsh Fusiliers that are lost in no man's land and haven't got a hope because they're caught right up against the German front line? They are panicking. Then their company officer finds them, a captain. Where have you lads been? Oh my God, sir, we're lost. Yeah, I know exactly where you are, come on. And he took them hours to get back. Through the shell holes, under barbed wire, the whole business. And then one by one, he puts them in the trench. And the British are there. God blimey, where you been? Oh, we got lost right up against the German wire. How'd you get back? Oh, Captain so-and-so sent us back. And everybody's looking at each other. And they went, that's him there. He was killed this morning. These stories, there are thousands of them. The guy whose best friend was blown to pieces that day before, atomized, appears to him in the night, smiles at him through the window, lights up a cigarette. He runs round, and the apparition just disappears. But there's a lit cigarette on the floor. That happened twice to that chap. So I used to think, wow, a guy who's blown to pieces, does his soul wander? Or is it as that soldier said, with all those men dead, how can God and all his angels gather up those souls? It'll take a millennia to gather them. We went back to the digs, to the accommodation, to Averil's Caff. So we have a few beers and she said, have you been down into the dugout, into the basement, underneath the house? And seeing it, I went, no. She said, come on, I'll take you down. And there was a very low light down there. And there's 2 sections to this. You'd call it a basement. To the right was where they'd found a German corpse and where they'd done a lot of surgery on Germans when they held that line. The other room was where the British did their first aid, because it's right behind the Somme front line. And the names are carved and regimental badges by the thousands, you know. And she's, oh, the bell went, somebody's at the bar. So I just sat down on the steps, lit me pipe. And I got to thinking, these floors that I'm sat on, these steps, are drenched in blood. The agony that must have been gone through in this room is just undescribable. And I stood up. And as I just stood up, I looked down, and there's a stretcher, just like that one there. The handles, you can't mistake them. There was a young British soldier lying on it, staring straight at me. And I reached down, and he gripped my hand. I could feel it, and he smiled. I will tell you now, ghosts have warm hands. Thank you very much for coming this evening.